Hello and welcome to Careers Unwrapped. I'm your host, Mark Fawcett, and as 2024 draws to a close, we're taking a moment to reflect on an incredible year of conversations, insights, and inspiration. This episode is a celebration of our greatest hits from the past year, a look back at the personal journeys, transformational moments, and the lessons that have helped to shape careers across a diverse range of industries. From navigating challenges to sharing proudest moments, 2024 has been a year full of relatable and inspiring stories for any of us thinking about our careers. So let's dive in. As we look back on 2024, it's the perfect time to reflect on careers that preserve and honor the past. In our first segment, we're shining a spotlight on archaeologist Phil Harding, reflecting on the fascinating journey of his career. From his early days, learning the ropes of excavation to becoming a familiar face in the world of archaeology, Phil shares how his passion for discovery has shaped his path. Along the way, we revisit some of the most notable digs from his career, offering a glimpse into the incredible moments that unearthed history and redefined his professional journey. And talking therefore about experience and possibly even old fossils, what have been some of the highlights for you? Particular digs, particular finds? What are the pieces that you think that was a top career moment?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember over 50 years of digging, and I was physically digging for over 50 years. Not many people do that nowadays because a lot of people have moved up into management and all those sorts of things. I was in the field for over 50 years, and in fact, when I realised that it was time to pull the plug, I was digging with people who were biologically young enough not only to be my sons, but my grandsons. And that's when I realised that the sort of lifestyle that I could live and did live when I was in my 20s, by the time I got into my 60s, I couldn't do it anymore. And so I had to reinvent myself. And now I spend more time on the computer writing. I quite enjoy that because what I means is that you're creating a far better archaeological legacy. There's nothing better than finding stuff. But what does it tell you about anything? Does it tell you about the past? And now I've kind of honed my writing skills, and I kind of enjoy that because you're creating that record, and there's something very satisfying about seeing a piece of work and you know that it's being incorporated into a journal, and that journal is going to be put onto a library shelf, and that people or scholars will be able to take that off that shelf long after I've been pushing up the daisies and referring back to my contribution in archaeology. Something very satisfying about that.
My interest in archaeology has always been with the personal stories that are told. Because I know that you and Wessex Archaeology has a dig which has been revisited many years called Barrow Clump, I think. And the stories of what are unearthed there, and I'm hoping you can maybe bring this a little bit to life, how you do this. I find the objects of a certain level of interest, but then what you use the objects for to tell about the people who had those objects. I find that fascinating. And how do you do that?
That's pretty much exactly what I'm saying. You know, if I'm digging a hole in the ground and I find, I don't know, in my case, a flint arrowhead, and I'm very pleased. I'm chuffed to bits that I found that arrowhead. But the first thing I do then is get a plastic bag, write on the label that that's what it is, bung it in there, and it goes away. And then you go back to and you dig some more up and you find another piece of bone or another piece of bone. What does it tell you? And what you're saying is it's the stories. And I think the more I get involved with archaeology, as I write, it's that ability or that aim to tell a story. And even though I do say so myself, one of the things that I think was very successful about Time Team, the Channel 4 program that you mentioned, was that it was making archaeology accessible by telling straightforward stories in words that ordinary people could understand. And there's two ways of me, if I write, I can write in a very academic style, which goes over a lot of people's heads, or I can, you don't have to dumb down, but anybody can read it. It can have exactly the same information in there. You just have to have that skill of just being able, you're not proving anything by using highfalutin words. You just bring it down into normal conversation.
And in these 5 decades of digging, as you said, you've obviously been involved in a lot of finds, a lot of discoveries, a lot of then the academic work that's followed that. But out of all of them, perhaps pick one where you can show how the story of the find connects to what you then found about people, about people's lives.
That's dead easy. My favourite site, but funnily enough, it was the last site I ever dug. And it was not my favourite because it was the last one I'd say, I'm never going to get my hands dirty again. It was the most wonderful excavation. I mean, first of all, you have to understand I'm a prehistorian. I love prehistory. I love that remoteness in time. So I'm a prehistorian. So it was a prehistoric site. It was on chalk, which is my heart is in Wiltshire. So a lot of big chunks of Wiltshire are on chalk. It's a lovely geology. So add that as well. It was in my beloved county of Wiltshire. And so that was beneficial. But it was also very, very closely linked to, in period times, to a site just up the road from me, Stonehenge. And so it has produced the largest quantity of pottery of that date, certainly in southern England. And that style of pottery was the style of pottery that was being made by the people who first laid out Stonehenge. And one of the things about Stonehenge is that there are a lot of cremation burials there, burnt remains. And when we first started to get the radiocarbon dates back, because radiocarbon dates have now just got so sophisticated, so accurate. And a chap said to me, do you realise, Phil, he said, the people that are buried at Stonehenge may have visited your site. And you go, don't me, that's quite something, you know.
So the people who first made Stonehenge, who pulled the stones over there, and then who used Stonehenge for whatever purposes they were using it for, could well have eaten or drunk or stored food in the finds that you were making. The connection could be that close.
Well, you see, I mean, a lot of the, certainly the really big stones at Stonehenge would not have been there when my folks were living on their site. The big stones didn't come for another 500 years. These were the guys who laid out the circle, the bank and ditch. They were the ground workers, if you like, who did that work. And a lot of their influences were from Orkney. So this period of where ideas were coming down from Orkney. And every now and again, it's your pleasure and your privilege to get a site. I don't think it would be far wide of the mark to say a game changer. You know, there's a hell of a lot of what we do in archaeology, which is repetitive. I would never call it mundane. But if you dig up, an Iron Age roundhouse, there have been umpteen roundhouse excavations done, and it makes another dot on the map. But you're not really going to learn much about Iron Age roundhouses from another one. You just need to know where people were living and where people were and how they were colonising the landscape and all the rest of it. But with this site of mine on the edge of Salisbury Plain, yeah, I think he's a game changer. And chances are that I won't be able to answer all the questions that we would want to know about that site. If you did, that's it. So what you do have is a very thorough archive, all available. You have all the artifacts, all correctly labelled, catalogued, boxed and all stored and all the rest of it. And you have my version of that story. In 100 years' time and what have you, long after I've gone, I would like to think that project was well enough done that students can come in with more skills, more techniques, more learning, and can actually still draw stuff out of that site. Then you know you've made a real contribution.
Following on from Phil's segment, we delve into a compelling moment from Fiona Campbell's episode, where she reflects on her transition from undercover journalism to leading digital platforms as controller of youth audience for BBC Three and BBC iPlayer. Fiona shared her experiences with the intensity of undercover filming and how those skills have influenced her approach to storytelling in the digital age. Her perspective provides a fascinating look at the evolution of media and her role in shaping content for a new generation. What personally for you during that phase are the highlights for you? What's the thing you look back and go, wow, that was a great job?
I think traveling, I think, I was filmed in Afghanistan under the Taliban. I filmed personally undercover in female schools, which were illegal, and the Taliban were and are very, scary and oppressive organization. Having experienced that and met Afghan women in that situation, I think that kind of changed how I view my own life and how privileged and fortunate I am. And I think that it was literally a life-changing experience. Similarly, I did a lot of Al-Qaeda related investigations. So we met before 9/11, a lot of Al-Qaeda activists who were then living in Britain before anybody really knew what they represented. And again, it just gives you this sort of international perspective on the world that is in close-up witness to world events that is just kind of mind-blowing and shapes you personally for life. And I went to Iraq during the Iraq War as well. I embedded in the 7th Armored Brigade going into battle. So these are all, when I say them out loud, it's incredible to think I've lived that life.
Yeah, I many years ago, I spent some time in the army, and as part of that, some of that time was in Northern Ireland, and some of it was in the Middle East. And the thing that still sticks with me most is the people that I met doing that, whether that was individual soldiers, whether it was people on the ground whose lives were being turned upside down by what was going on. And that sort of personal connection, far more than the big picture, is what I remember most. And I'm wondering if, especially from what you talk about the time in Afghanistan, if there are particular people or memories that really stand out for you there.
Definitely, because that was another example of meeting people. There were some women who were running very tiny NGOs for women, so that they could meet together and just have emotional and psychological support at that time. And it was still a very dangerous activity, even though the Taliban would know that this was a small international NGO, which was literally run by one woman. And I can still see very clearly in my head walking into that house where they held those meetings, and the women I met, and some of the young women I met said, I really want you to come and meet my father and my brother. And I was, do you really? Because first of all, I had to wear the full chador, right over me. And then I was like, well, if we're caught, this is just going to have serious repercussions. And we'd walk kilometers through Kabul in the heat, shuffling along, hoping we weren't going to get stopped. And then we went, and I had lunch with this girl's father and her brother, and he brought out his old photograph book, which would have been strictly banned, of all the pictures of them dancing when they were students at Kabul University. And in the 60s, Kabul was, a much freer, society in terms of women's rights, students' rights. And that was just an incredible risk that they took to reach out and have communication with one individual journalist like me. I wasn't filming anything. It was just literally to go for lunch in their house undercover, and a lot of them managed to escape subsequently, but they never got to go back to their country, which is a terrible thing to consider.
And then for you within your career, as you transitioned from very frontline journalism to now a much more digital first platform, how has your own approach to commissioning and content changed during that?
I think it's just, I always find it incredibly interesting to have the digital tools to see how audiences are literally live reacting to putting something out. And I find that's endlessly engaging. So, we launched A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, a drama, this Monday. And we put a lot of effort into launching exclusive trails before release, which garnered millions of views before the show was even released. And then we released the show on Monday, and you immediately see the iPlayer consumption taking off. So I love that. That's by being very close to an audience, to seeing which elements of what you've produced the audience most react to and most spend time with. And basically the audience is teaching you, and then you use that insight to go again. And I find that very addictive compared to years ago when all you had was put your show out and then see the next day when it was too late what the overnights were.
As we head into 2025, we can expect AI to become even more prevalent in our lives. In this segment, we look back at a fascinating moment from Jocelyn Burnham's episode. As an AI speaker and training specialist, Jocelyn shares her early interest in technology, including her first project, a quirky, lemon-obsessed bot. Jocelyn's journey and insight offers an inspiring look, I think, at how curiosity and creativity can shape meaningful careers in emerging fields.
Now, there's an increasing group of people who we look at, we read about, or who watch, who are specialists in AI. They're experts, they're leads in this, but it's still so fresh in terms of a technology. So in your particular case, because I know you started in more of a marketing communications career, how did you move from that to someone who now has the genuine credibility and experience that means that people want to listen to your views on AI?
I think, that's an interesting mixture of both my own story and also the tech itself and what it means to be getting into AI at this point. My personal perspective is that there are individual experts in AI, in the tech, in the development of it, in the ethics of it, and that should be respected and is amazing. But I think right now in the application of some of these tools, there's not really as much of a conversation about what we're comfortable with as a culture or as a sector, and how we want to kind of use those tools to further our own intentions. So I think that right now, basically it's wide open because this is a whole new chapter in technology and in how technology meets artistry and meets the intentions of people who are working with exciting ideas. So for me personally, I have been into tech forever. I've always been kind of making silly things. I made my first chatbot when I was about 14. And all it would do is talk to you about lemons and how much you really liked lemons and how healthy lemons were. And I found this very exciting. But ever since, I've always been tinkering away. And then in my life, I got into working in theatre marketing. And I was always kind of the person who was looking for, how could we innovate with the tech? How could we build a tool that could do part of this for us? And had a mad scientist vibe going on where I was like, I've built a new Excel sheet and it does so many exciting things. So I loved playing that role. And then when things became a little bit more kind of crazy with AI in the last few years, and especially with some of the large language models that were coming out like ChatGPT, I saw very quickly that this is going to be something which is going to be hugely impactful for the world of culture. I don't take a position on good or bad. I just could see that it would be impactful. And I thought it'd be interesting to try and meet people who are talking about it. So within that, I put myself forward just to do an opening talk about what I've discovered. And then that led to being asked to do other talks, then collaborating with people, and then meeting more people in that space. And it kind of snowballed from there. And then since then, I've been able to make it my full-time thing, which has been really surreal and kind of exciting. But
and some of the people you deal with then, the artists in particular, so visual artists, writers, etc., how much are they seeing AI as an opportunity, something that can enhance, speed up, or improve their work? And how much are they seeing it as a threat, something that could take away their opportunities and reduce their work?
I would say right now it feels about 90% of people don't have a great feeling towards AI in the art. I think that's probably a fair thing to say. I meet the occasional person who's doing amazing work and is, just looking into it and is letting them kind of be vulnerable with it and see what happens. But I would say right now, there's a lot of anxiety, I think is probably the word I would come back to. It is less about maybe getting really into it and then finding things which they hate about it, and maybe a little bit more overwhelm, I think might be fair to say, where there's so much news about it. There are so many different types of AI. There's so many different people are making that it just becomes this big noise and it's just sort of overwhelming. So I think that's the emotion I tend to hit first. It's not even fear, it's more overwhelm. And it's more, how do I even start?
It's interesting with that because in my work, I do quite a lot of writing, written content writing for public speaking. And I have a process that I've developed over time that works for me. And so I've played around with how to use AI for that process. And at the beginning, I thought I'll just get AI to write the speech or to write this article. And I would feed in a brief, feed in some of my previous pieces. And what came out was sometimes it had inaccuracy. Sometimes it felt a little verbose, but it never really felt like my language. And where I've got to it now is I use it like a creative partner at the beginning of the process. I use it to accelerate some of the ideas developments. And I've found myself settling into a rhythm where something that might have taken me 6 hours before takes me 4 hours now and is 3 or 4% better than it might have been. So that's my own personal use for it in a writing space. And I'm wondering if other artists and other spaces are starting to find out for themselves where it works for them individually.
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing is that it is where it works for you individually. With technology, often there's a rush to find like the best way of using it or the most efficient. And I think what's interesting about AI is it's actually really personal and individualistic what you end up using and what your kind of workflow with it is. And everyone has quite a different one. So I think when you discover things which fit your particular working style, it can really accelerate it, or it can be something which can give you a different perspective into it. People that,
Let's get down to some of the more specifics then in relation to that, because we're talking quite general terms at the moment. But what tools have you come across or used or seen those working culture and the arts use that are making a difference for them personally? What specific tools are you impressed by?
Yeah, sure. Right now, it's definitely some of the large language models. So there are things like Claude, which is quite similar to ChatGPT. ChatGPT itself is very strong. There are some open source ones like Llama and Mistral as well, which are also very good and you can use for free. And a lot of the time, people in the arts who I'm speaking to who are embracing this, first, they're coming at it from how can I use this as a bit of a creative partner? So kind of giving an idea, having a conversation about something. And that seems to work quite well for them. And often it's more of how can I have something critique my work and actually sort of be a friendly bit of criticism that can say, oh, you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that. That's being used for it too. And then also it's things like accessibility too, which I think is one of the most exciting things about AI is how it can make content much more accessible for different audiences, different people. And when I say that, I don't just mean in the traditional sense. I also mean in the sense of, there could be an academic article, which I know is talking about topics which I find interesting, but I can't quite follow the language because it's very specialized. And something you can do with something like Claude or ChatGPT is put that article into it and say, actually, can you explain this in more simplified terms, and then have a conversation with them about the results of that article. So it's things like that where you're unlocking information that you didn't normally have access to are some of the ways that I find it most exciting. But beyond that, I find it's more about how it works with what you give it instead of telling it to make things fresh. So I find it much more useful if I'm asking it to critique something or to find, logical flaws or accessibility gaps instead of saying, hey, can you go and create the world's best copy? Because that's not normally the best place to start.
And Tom Ayling shares how his early love of rare books led to a career in antiquarian bookselling. His journey highlights the beauty of turning a passion for history and discovery, in his case, into a unique and rewarding profession, and how to build your business through social media. And I think that's one thing that I presume many of us find so interesting about the area you're in and books in general is that, of course, you can have the very, very rare, very costly items, for, historical value, but you've also got the things that aren't that rare, but because of who they've passed between, they mean so much to those people. And I was given a box of books not too long ago by my parents, which had come from their parents. And I just remember this very old, withered copy of a Winnie the Pooh that I just remembered actually having that read to me when I was a child. So there's no value in it at all, except to me. And I think that's what books can do to a lot of people. Now, many children start out as readers and then they fade away. It's a known problem, just switching off, especially today with social media being so attractive. But what fired up your passions when you were younger? What do you think turned you from somebody who who, like many others, read, into somebody who actually thought, "No, I'm going to do more with this"?
Well, I'm very lucky in that my parents encouraged reading a great deal. You know, we went to the library every week to get a new book out, and I was fortunate in that I developed the habit of reading for pleasure at quite a young age. But that's very different to what I do now. And that's, you know, reading is, you know, a wonderful thing that we all do and love and enjoy. And that is a process of seeing a book as a text. And so you might have 2 copies of Pride and Prejudice, and they contain the same words in the same order, and therefore to the vast majority of people seem the same. But when you go into the world of book history and antiquarian books and the trade in it, it's all about the differences between 2 copies of the same text that become interesting. So I was very fortunate in that when I was 10 years old, one of my favorite authors came to visit my school. Her name was Caroline Lawrence, and she wrote a brilliant series of books called The Roman Mysteries, which was almost like the sort of Famous Five or Secret Seven being set in ancient Rome or something. And I brought in very excitedly as an eager 10-year-old, a big pile of books for her to sign. And I don't know why this was, but 6 of them were paperbacks and one of them was a hardback. And so she went away merrily signing my large pile of books while my classmates stood in line behind me. And she got to the last one, this orange hardback book. And she said, "Hey, this is a first edition." And I thought, that's not a word I'd heard before, but I have to say that those 2 words next to each other did sound quite special to me. And then she said, because it's first edition, there's a mistake in it. And I'll correct it for you. So she inscribed it on the title page for me. And then she turned towards the back of the book to where there was this typo. And she got out her marker pen and she corrected it by hand. And then she put a big exclamation mark in the margin to apologize for the error. And suddenly I had an object that felt so different to what I walked in with earlier that morning. Not just that it had been signed for me, but that it was, you know, fundamentally textually different to, you know, the paperback copy that all my classmates were having had signed. And so you get that I got this feeling, and it wasn't a sophisticated feeling, and it wasn't as sophisticated as the way I'm expressing it to you now. But you got this feeling that some books are more special than others, even when they're, you know, copies of the same book. And that's really at the heart of what we do in the trade in rare books and manuscripts.
And so when you started working, you were a bookseller for a company, topping company, booksellers. And then you moved from there, I believe, into being an antiquarian bookseller. How did that career path start? And actually for a lot of people listening to this, how did you get to realize that this could be a career?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that, and I think it's true for a lot of people who are, you know, passionate about the arts and want a career in the arts or a career in literature. And that's often you can't see the path going forward, but it's quite easy to join up going backwards. If you read my CV, I mean, it's sort of bookseller, but, and that might all make sense going forwards. But I started working at a wonderful independent bookshop called Topping Company while I was at university. I badgered them for a job. And then eventually, after sort of 6 months of begging, I bumped into the owner at the British Museum at an exhibition of Greek marbles, and he thought, "Oh yeah, this might be the sort of chap we need." So utter, well, I mean, part persistence, but then utter chance that the job came about. But I worked there for my sort of last year and a half at university, and absolutely fell in love with working in a bookshop, with bookselling. And specifically bookselling. When I got that job, I thought I'd love to work in a bookshop. What a lovely environment to work in. And when you're a student, it's probably better than, you know, serving drinks at a bar or waiting tables, which is what I'd done previously. But I discovered the more I did it that I really liked selling books. Because it wasn't selling in the way that, you know, you might think of a salesperson with, you know, sales targets and deadlines, cold calling people all day. Book selling is the art of recommendation. It's talking to people about what they've read previously or the person for whom they're buying a gift and trying to find the right thing and drawing on your store of knowledge and your colleague's store of knowledge in order to fulfill that. And the amount of satisfaction that you can get selling a $7.99 paperback when it's absolutely the perfect thing for that person was just utterly extraordinary. I just absolutely absolutely loved it. But sort of career prospects wise at that stage, I was just finishing my final year at university. And what I thought I wanted to do was go off and be an academic. So I'd actually, after my undergraduate degree, I started postgraduate study at the School of Oriental Studies in London. And about 2 months into it, I just missed bookselling too much. And so that's when I applied for the job at Yonkers Rare Books, having decided that pivoting into the antiquarian book trade, one, might be more interesting, but two, might have, sort of, I guess, greater career progression within it than working with new books. And, got the job, and I've been selling books ever since.
As we end the year, reflecting on collaboration and understanding feels more important than ever. Lastly, we revisit James Matthewson's reflections on the value of working across party lines and finding common ground with those you may disagree with. As a political commentator, James shares his pride in fostering collaboration and mutual respect in a divisive landscape. He also opens up about the personal career transitions that shaped his approach, offering thoughtful advice on adapting to change and maintaining integrity. His insights remind us of the importance of bridging divides and staying true to your values in any career. That particular area is an area we could have a whole conversation upon, and I think we might come back to it, because people who are thinking, I want to play a role in politics, we need good people on all parties with all sorts of viewpoints in there to make things happen, but they need to feel that they can do that in a way that's safe. And I think it's interesting how, when you were describing what it felt, what you learned at the beginning, that the other side of that is actually the collaborative piece that has to happen to make things go forward. So if we're sitting on the outside, we see our clips of one side shouting at the other side, and then a bigger lecture or shouts even more, and then they change sides and they still shout at each other. And what's actually going on behind the scenes to discuss the best way forward for people and for the country?
Yeah, and I think if we saw more of that, because there's a sense of shame from all who have their political bases, right? No conservative who goes to their local conservative association wants to say, I had a great dinner with a Labour MP the other night, and vice versa. So I think there's a great deal of shame sometimes about it. And I totally disagree with that. And I think it should be a sense of pride, that we can work across party lines to get things done. It's the way in any other workplace in the country. You have to work with people you disagree with. And that is the first thing you are told, isn't it? You won't like everyone you work with. You probably won't like most of them at times. But you have to work across those boundaries because you're there to do a job. And that job is very important. I think if we saw more of that reflected in the media, and if politicians were more honest about how collaborative that is, we wouldn't have people kind of coming in and getting the shock. But encouraging young people to stand for elected office, there is no shortage of encouraging young people to get involved as staffers or behind the scenes roles. That feels comfortable, that feels a lot more safe in their mind a lot of the time. But to put yourself forward as the elected individual, that takes a lot of gumption, and you don't often come back from it. Who employs an ex-MP who lost their seat? What future is there for you? So it's quite an interesting question as to what we do with those people.
And so you did this support role to begin with to a Labour MP, and then you decided, actually, I'm going to have a go myself. Which seat did you get put forward for selection?
So it was a county council election at first, and this was in my hometown, right? So my hometown had always been, in my memory, had been Liberal Democrat, because the Conservatives lost it in a by-election in the 60s. So there was a chance for me to try and come through the middle as a Labour candidate. The Labour Party needs candidates everywhere, and it stands paper candidates normally. What we call a paper candidate is somebody who, it puts their name on the paper and doesn't do anything, right? So that there are people, if there's members in the seat or people who want to vote Labour, they've got someone they can vote for, but you're not going to win it, so you don't bother doing anything. I didn't seem to get that memo. Instead, I was a paper candidate who suddenly started doing a load of stuff, and it really, really annoyed people. And because it's my hometown, I had me and about 6 of my friends going around and it scared the local Conservatives to death. And they were like, "What? This isn't meant to be happening. You can't win the seat. What are you doing? And do they know something we don't know?" And all this stuff. So, in the end, we went from 7th place to 4th place. I was thrilled with that, but it was a challenge, and it resulted in me walking around my hometown, a very small town where everyone knows everyone. And I was going into the co-op one day to get some bread, and a guy spat on me, and I thought, hang on a minute, is that, and I challenged him, and he said, well, you Labour scum, and I thought, this is my hook. I've never felt more safe. I mean, my hometown is like, the most kind of idyllic little hometown. Alnwick in Northumberland, it's where two of the Harry Potter films were filmed. There's a castle, it's a beautiful little town, but just the animosity that was there because you were all of a sudden associated with a political party. I think that really informed my thinking as I went forward, working in politics as well.
It's clearly, as you said earlier, there are some social media platforms that feed this, that build an increase in people being comfortable being abusive online first of all, but that's clearly stepping into real life as well, and people are more abusive, more violent towards politicians. Where do we go with that in terms of still wanting brilliant, bright, passionate people to come into politics, but not, quite frankly, but just being put off by what's involved?
Yeah, I think we have to protect them. And it's not a conversation that people like to have. This idea that politicians have everything and anything they ever want and they live some luxurious life. Like, I've got 2 mates who've just been elected in that most recent general election there for the first time. One of them was working on the checkout at Tesco 2 days before he was an MP. That's kind of how quickly things can turn around for you. The second that he became an MP, people are shouting at him about how rich he is, and he's like, not even had a paycheck yet, not a single paycheck from Parliament. So it's this divide in our minds as to the life that politicians live in. Don't get me wrong, there are many rich politicians, and there are those who've got jobs on the side. They're using their influence to just set up, agencies or lobbying firms or anything like that. It will help their business, whatever their business is. But there are also many normal MPs. You can't group them all in the same category. You can go and look at their expenses. You can go and look at their exactly what they need. But the problem is, those who claim more expenses a lot of the time get more criticism. They're often the ones who don't have the luxurious lifestyle or the money. They need to rely on the expense system. They need to rely on that. It's a bit like the debate recently about Keir Starmer and his free clothes and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second that he can't afford, suits, but if you're expected as the Prime Minister to wear a Brooks Brothers suit, that's 250 grand and your salary is 110 grand. Yeah. Are you going to do that? Are you going to buy that? Of course you're not. And then someone says, well, you should have one. I will get it for you, as your friend. And of course you do it. So it's these systems that exist, these expectations. It's very strange, the whole world.
So there we are. Thank you for joining us on this special episode of Careers Unwrapped, where we've taken a moment to reflect on some inspiring stories and impactful moments from 2022. As we head into 2025, it's clear that careers are not just about the paths we take, but also about the lessons we learn along the way, the people we meet, and the challenges we embrace. We hope that these highlights have perhaps sparked ideas, encouraged reflection, maybe even inspired you to think about your own career journey in a new light. There's so much more to come in the new year with fresh conversations and more stories to explore. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organization to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.